Hello and welcome to another satellite tutorial for MG316. And in today's satellite tutorial we are going to look at ER in Sweden. Now in our last week's satellite tutorial we covered Germany, employment relations in Germany. And once we cover employment relations in Sweden, you will see that there are a number of similarities between the employment relations in Sweden and the employment relations in Germany. To start off, before we go into everything or anything, uh, some of the key similarities between Germany and Sweden is first of all the co-determination. We saw that in Germany we had co-determination whereby the two parties they come together and they make the decisions. Similarly, in Sweden, you will see that co-determination is also present, and here they also do a similar thing whereby the management and the employees or the representatives of the employees, and these representatives could be either through trade union or through works councils. So just like Germany, Sweden also has got works councils present here, and their function is similar to what their function is in Germany. And trade unions also, you will see that trade unions are quite powerful in Sweden. So just like Germany, trade unions are quite powerful compared to any of the other countries that we have covered so far, including UK, USA, Japan. The trade union in Sweden is the most powerful out of all the countries that we've studied so far, even to the extent that their trade union density is quite high. So, ER in Sweden. Now, initially, well, currently, Sweden is a developed country. However, Sweden was in fact a poor country. So let's look at ER and IR in Sweden background. So industrialization. When did industrialization begin in Sweden? So it started in the early 1900s, and it was a poor agricultural country. So industrialization actually started almost 100 years later than when it started in UK. Currently, Sweden is a wealthy country. It has a good social welfare system. And how does it have a good social welfare system? Is because the tax rate, the income tax rate is really high in Sweden. I think almost 44% or close to 44% of your income is taxed or is in taxed given the government. And then, well, actually the people do not mind in Sweden, and the reason for this is because of transparency reasons and accountability reasons. So people are able to see that the tax that they have paid, where the money is being utilized, hence they have a very good social welfare system as well. Just a note before we continue any further, that employment relations in Sweden, this unit is not present there in the current textbook. So please, you will not find it if you're hunting for the notes on Sweden. However, we have uploaded all the materials on Moodle, and you will find the textbook notes as well as these lecture notes are already there on Moodle under ER in Sweden. All right. So population. What is the population? So their population was somewhere around 8.8 million, and in that actually is in that is a old figure. The current population in 2019 was somewhere around 10 million. Their labor workforce was 4.3 million. Currently, it must be around 5 million or so. And 75% of women are in the labor force, highest in the OECD countries. So the workforce in sectors is 2% is in agriculture, 25% is in the manufacturing sector. It is also called the industries, and majority of the employment is in the service sector or the service industry, whereby 73%, and this is in line with all the other countries that we have seen. Note that we did discuss when we were discussing UK, USA, Japan, and Germany, that all these countries are now moving towards the service industry or the service sector, and it is not just a trend in these countries itself, but in all the countries around the world, that they are moving towards this service industry, providing service. And one of the major service industry is the tourism industry, which has now taken a bigger hit due to this COVID-19 situation, isn't it? So let's move on to the IR actors and ER actors. So how many ER and IR actors are there? Yes, if you recall that there are three ER and IR actors. And what are these three IR and actors? IR and ER actors. Please note that we are using the term ER and IR interchangeably. There is a small difference between ER and IR, but the world actually now is preferring employment relations compared to industrial relations. The reason being is because employment relations is a more comprehensive term to include all the parties in the relations, and it's a more cooperative approach, whereby there is cooperation between all these three parties, and these three parties being the, yes, what are these three parties? Yes, if you remember correctly, these are employees and their representatives. Who are the employees representatives? Exactly, the trade unions, isn't it? And we have got employers and their associations, or employers and employer associations, and finally the government or the state. Please note, in the Pacific Island countries, we use the term government and the state interchangeably. However, there are some differences between the government and the state, and it is more present in countries like Australia, USA, Canada, and so forth. So wherever there is a difference, we try to differentiate the two. But here in the Pacific Island countries, we really do not worry about it, because we just have got one government, isn't it? And that is our main government that is in power. So whether we say the government or the state, it all means the same thing in the Pacific Island countries. So looking at the first ER party, which is trade unions. So the trade union density, actually their trade union density has been really high over the years. I think to the extent that they have reached the trade union density somewhere around in the 90%, 92, 93% at one point in time. Yes, that high. we have not seen trade union densities even above 50% in most of the countries in the textbook, isn't it? And I do not think in any of the countries that we have studied so far it goes beyond 60%. Might have gone up to 50%. I think in one of the countries we saw it above 50%, 56% or something, probably in UK, in Germany. And now you see in Sweden at one point in time they had a trade union density at more than 90%. That's something. What does that tell you? Having a trade union density at 90%. Yes, what does it tell you? Think, give you a few minutes to think about it before we move on. Yes, try at least. Write it down. What does it tell you if a trade union density is really high in a country? Think about what happens in USA. The trade union density is the lowest out of all the countries that we are going to study in USA. The trade union density is just a mere 11% in America. Compare that with the trade union density in Sweden. So it says that trade unions are powerful in Sweden. Does it say that? Yes, yes, it could. In fact, trade unions are really powerful in Sweden compared to what we have seen in all the other countries. What else does having a high trade union density tell us? The government, think about the government. The government is in support of the trade unions, isn't it? You see, in UK, when Margaret Thatcher came into power, she restricted trade union movement, isn't it? And then trade union density declined. When Ronald Reagan came into power in USA, trade union density declined. So here in Sweden, high trade union density, that means there is support from the government, and this also means the trade unions are really powerful. The trade unions are able to voice out the issues of its members. The workers, they want to join the trade unions, isn't it? Having really high trade union density. Now, currently, the trade union density in Sweden is not obviously 90%. The trade union density has declined over the years, last decade or so, and I think the current density is somewhere around 60%. In 2017, it was 65.6%. So it's still really high, isn't it? The trade union density, unlike what we have seen in any other countries. All right, so origins, early 1880s. This is when the first trade unions started to emerge in Sweden, and the first unions were obviously craft unions, isn't it? Out of not out in all the countries that we have studied so far, the first unions to emerge or to form were craft unions, and then in the 1910 the industrial unions started to emerge. I hope you are able to differentiate. By now you should be able to actually differentiate what are craft unions, what are industrial unions, what are enterprise unions, what are plant level unions, what are regional unions. what is the umbrella body of unions. You should know the differences between all the various types of unions. But just to refresh your memory, uh, industrial unions are unions that are present in a particular industry, that are present in a particular sector, and workers from that particular industry or from that particular sector are able to join that particular union, whereas enterprise unions is specific to just one organization only. So if you belong to a particular organization, then trade unions, then if you belong to one particular organization, then you can become a member of that union. From the 1981 to 1930s, mainly blue collar unions, but after 1930s, there was a growth of white collar unions. No need for unions to register, unlike in USA. Here, unions have got something unique whereby they do not have to register. So they only need to form, and then they do not need to register. So they are automatically registered. They are covered by the legislation present, so they don't have to register. Now, unions, as I have said, that they are very powerful in Sweden, and so powerful that unions have the right to access company books. In all the other countries that we have studied, now unions are not this powerful that they have access to company books. So here in Sweden, the unions are so powerful that they have access to company books. And there are very few new unions. There are mostly old unions. There is little change. And this is one of the reasons as to why the trade union density is so high in Sweden, more than 60%. What does this tell you is that the unions, they have laid a good foundation, and they are now building upon this foundation. So they are able to voice out the issues that the workers have. They are able to include everyone. They are able to represent. They are able to lobby the government. They are being heard, isn't it? So there are very few new unions. Now let's look at the umbrella bodies of trade unions. And again, the umbrella bodies of trade unions, the umbrella body is the body that looks after all the other trade unions present in the country. So there are three main trade unions, TUCs. TUCs is called Trade Union Congress. Remember, this TUC name was coined in UK with the formation of the first trade union body, the first umbrella trade union body, that was in UK, TUC. So you can also call this the umbrella body of trade union, and you can also call this the National Trade Union Organization. So there are three main umbrella bodies. One is for the blue collar workers, and there are two for the public sector unions. So we have the first one, which is the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, LO, formed in 1898. Now this represents the blue collar unions. If you see, the acronym given here is LO, Swedish Trade Union Confederation, LO. Please do not come up with your own acronyms such as STUC. These acronyms are from the Swedish names, you guessed it. Just like what we saw in Germany, We had got BDA as the umbrella body for the employers. We had the DGB for the umbrella body of the unions in Germany. So just like that, these acronyms are from their Swedish names. So Swedish Trade Union Confederation, LO. This covers 90% of the blue collar unions and very high trade union density. Total of 16 industrial unions are affiliated with LO. In an example, there are two very big unions, and these are Municipal Workers Union and the Metal Workers Union. These two are the very big unions that are affiliated with LO. 2 million members. LO is the most influential umbrella body for trade union. Previously, LO did the collective bargaining on behalf of its members, but currently it does not. And this is in line with what we have seen in other countries, that the umbrella body of trade union now advises the other affiliated unions how to do CB, how to do collective bargaining, but it does not directly get involved in the collective bargaining process itself. The Rengo does not do it, DGB does not do it, Trade Union Congress, no, IFL-CIO, same thing. So likewise, LO also does not bargain or participate directly in the CB process, in the collective bargaining process. But it does provide advice. Remember that. It helps out the unions. It does not do the job for them. The next one is TCO, formed in 1944, Swedish Confederation of Salaried Employees. This is largely for white collar units, only strong in the civil service. 18 unions are affiliated, members 1.2 million, and just like LO, it also does not participate in the CB process. Next one is SACO, Swedish Confederation of Professional Association. Here the members are those graduates. Moving on to employers and their associations. Just like the unions, there are a number of employer associations, umbrella bodies. There is one for the private sector, and there are three for the public sector. So the first one is Swedish Employers Federation, which is for the private sector. The acronym is SAF. SAF again comes from the Swedish names. 41 companies, 41,000 companies are affiliated with the SAF with 1.3 million members. SAV, Swedish Agency for Government Employees. This is for the federal government, the national government. Right? The state is the largest employer. Pay is set by the private sector, but public sector is always behind in most countries. Export countries, so there is overseas competition, and it does have an impact on the wages negotiations. Then there is Swedish Association for Local Government Employees, and finally there are Federation of County Councils. So these two are, or they act on behalf of the 23 counties and 278 local governments. So that's about employers and their association. Next is the government or the state. Just like in other countries, there are these three arms of the government. We have the executive arm, the legislative arm, and the judiciary arm. So let's look at the government in depth. So the government is ruled by the Social Democratic Party for 59 years. That's from 1932 to 1991, and now rules via coalition. And the current PM of Sweden is Stefan Löfven, and he is also the leader of the Social Democratic Party. The country has a high tax of 44% and developed social welfare security state. Is yeah, so in the beginning, during the introduction, I did mention that it has a really high income tax, isn't it? And this has been justified, so though people of Sweden they do not mind, because there is transparency, there is accountability present as to they see where their money goes. Some of the legislations, there are a number of legislations present in Sweden. We have the Security of Employment Act of 1974, the Promotion Employment Act, okay, 1974, with the Joint Regulation of Working Life Act 1976. Now, before the 1970s, the government played very little role in the employment relations and settling disputes. However, from the 1970s onwards, the government has actually taken a greater role in employment relations. And this is similar to, if you remember what we saw in UK, the government was not intervening much into the employment relations. But after the 1970s, the government did start or became an interventionist government from a voluntarist structure, such that the government started to pass more legislations and things like that. And a similar trend is present in Sweden. Note that as we go along, I try to compare and contrast the countries that we have already studied, so that you can remember what we have studied in those countries. And if you are asked a compare and contrast question in the exam, you will be able to compare and contrast the countries. Wage settlements was through the accord system, social settlements, and these accords were a tri-state agreement, tripart agreement. not tri-state, sorry, tripartite agreement. Tripartism is present. Tri means three parties are involved. And who are these three parties then? The government, the employees, and the workers or their representatives, which are the unions. So the government, the union, and the employers and the association. So these are the three parties that are involved in the accord. So they had the accord system. There was a 1906 accord and then 1938 accord. Moving on to collective bargaining. Note that we are now discussing the processes. We are done with the uh, actors. We are now looking at the processes of employment and industrial relations. So collective bargaining operates at industry level, which means that collective bargaining is centralized. I have discussed this over a number of times, what centralized and decentralized collective bargaining means. Please do not get this wrong if you are asked a question on this. So, what does this mean? Collective bargaining is centralized, operates at the industrial level. What this means is that the industrial trade union and the industrial employee association or the employers in a particular industry, they all sit together and they make a collective uh, they do this collective bargaining process and then they make a collective agreement. Collective agreement is the outcome of the collective bargaining process. So this happens in a particular industry, and whatever agreement is reached, then every worker and every employers, they are to be abide by this collective agreement regardless of the firm size. And this is why the small and medium organizations, they do not like centralized collective bargaining, because usually they are the ones that are disadvantaged. See, the big organizations, the large enterprises, they are able to pay their workers higher, but the small organizations, which are which is struggling actually, they might not be able to pay their workers whatever the industry negotiates. So this is why small and medium organizations, they usually do not like centralized collective bargaining. And this is something that has been addressed in Germany. We saw that to increase membership, what these unions and employers they did was that you can become or you can affiliate with an umbrella body of the union. However, you are not required uh, to follow the collective agreement that is decided in that industry level collective bargaining. So that was something good for the medium and small organizations, isn't it? So likewise, we can see here in Sweden that collective bargaining is also centralized. So this is another similarity between Germany and Sweden, and there is a difference between Germany and Sweden. The similarity is that the collective bargaining operates at the industry level, and it is centralized. And the difference is that Germany's collective bargaining is actually shifting towards decentralization, and even to the extent that small and medium organizations, they are excluded from the industry or industrial collective agreement that is decided. And next one is worker participation in industrial democracy. So worker participation, actually, in Germany and Sweden, both these countries, there is a great deal of emphasis on worker participation, and this is where the co-determination comes in, to the extent that they have a co-determination act What does this mean? This means that not collective bargaining, but worker participation to most extent is compulsory in Germany and Sweden. Think about it. In UK, in USA, in Japan, employee involvement and participation is voluntary. In those countries, it is up to the managers, the management, whether they want to involve the workers in the workplace or not. And in most cases, they are not involved, with the exception of Japan. Even in Japan, if workers are involved, then they are not involved at the highest level. They are usually involved at the lowest level of management. However, in Germany and Sweden, collect the worker participation is to most extent compulsory, so workers are involved. And how is it done? It is done through works councils. It's not just trade unions. Remember, these two countries also have works councils apart from the trade unions. So worker participation is really strong in Sweden. Why? Strong humanistic ideas, and the country also is not totally following the capitalist economy. Country is being run by socially oriented parties. This co-determination is present in Sweden, and they also have a wage and a funds, investment funds, and this is to reduce wage and salary gaps. There is something called the dancing approach in employment relations, and there is something called a boxing approach in employment relations. I do not know if I mentioned this in any of the other countries ER that we were studying in for any of the other countries, but let me mention this now. The dancing approach of employment relations is see, when you're happy, what do? You smile, you dance, isn't it? And when you're angry, then you want to fight. So, likewise, in employment relations, when there is cooperation between the parties, the social parties, the government, the employers and the association, and workers and their representatives, the trade unions, if there is harmony between these three social actors, then it is said that that this is a dancing approach towards employment relations. There is not many conflicts. The IR system or the ER system is stable. There is similarity between the ideas of these three social actors, these three social partners, and IR system is stable. Hence, dancing approach. Everyone is happy. But if there is variation in the ideas, the government wants something else, the employers they want something else, they don't want the government ideas, the unions they don't want the government ideas, they don't want to work in line, or they do not want to cooperate with the employers, they want something else totally, then there is conflict between these social partners. Strikes, lockouts happen, there is conflict, and hence the IR system is not stable, it is unstable. Hence, it is called the boxing approach towards employment relations. So, Sweden and Germany are those two countries which have the dancing approach towards employment relations. Sorry. Yes, so Sweden and Germany are those two countries which have got the dancing approach towards employment relations. And finally, we look at some trends, issues, and changes. So, introduction of human resource management. So, human resource management has also come to Sweden, like in all the other countries. There is technological change. There is a global shift of production. There is a reduction in local jobs, increase in multinational corporations. So organizations are moving overseas. Then there is a reduction in jobs, in local jobs. There is displacement of workers with technological change. Workers are displaced. Reduction in working time. In the Western countries, usually there is 40 or 45-hour weeks. Sweden, 35 hours per week. There is flexibility in working time, flexible working hours. Example, for women workers, they usually like to work flexible working hours. Right, research has shown this. So this change is coming into Sweden as well. There is an increase in service sector jobs, and Sweden was also not prone to the 2009 economic crisis. So there were job losses, but things are were improving. However, the current situation is, you can also add on, is the coronavirus pandemic, which is affecting jobs as well. Reduction in jobs, flexible working hours, remote working, and these are worldwide trends, not just that it's present in Sweden. Pick any country, all the countries that we have studied, this is coming in. That the workers are now working from home. Work from home is now getting more common. All right, so this concludes employment relations in Sweden, ER in Sweden. Again, if you have got any questions, any queries with regards to employment relations in Sweden, send me an email. And again, together with the big blue button, this copy of this satellite tutorial will also be uploaded to YouTube, and I'll provide a link on Moodle. All right, thank you all. In our next satellite tutorial, we are going to look at employment relations in Australia. Now, your textbook, the current textbook, has employment relations in Australia. Have a look at that, and it's also present in the course book, employment relations in Australia. So please read employment relations in Australia, and we are going to cover employment relations in Australia in our next satellite tutorial. And just like today, as I've been comparing all the countries that we have studied so far, again, when I discuss employment relations in Australia, I will try to compare and contrast with all the other countries that we have studied so far. All right, thank you all.